Today we're talking about AWS monitoring and optimization. And I think my next slide is going to introduce the subject properly, right? So what we'll learn, we'll look at the things that makes it happen, right? So when you talk about monitoring, let me go back to this. So when you talk about monitoring and um, when you talk about monitoring, when you talk about monitoring and optimization, what are we talking about? So today we'll look at the services basically that helps you do that, right? CloudWatch, we talk about EventBridge, X-Ray, CloudTrail, trusted advisor. That's what I'm saying. Today I'll be a bit fast, so just bear with me. I'll try because I really want to cover this entire slide in this class. So I'll be a bit fast, but I'll make sure I'm passing the message while I'm doing that. Okay. So we're talking about monitoring, right? And that's really what we're talking about. And the question you ask yourself is why monitoring, right? And when I say why monitoring, it could be two things. You're either being proactive, right, or you are being reactive. Um, when you say proactive, what does it mean? Proactive just means, I mean, if it's like an English word, right? It's like you're trying to prevent something before it happens. That's just being proactive. That's how most organizations work, right? Um, because the thing is that you don't want some. Let's think about all the things we've installed. You have a cluster, a database cluster, for example. You don't want it to be like get to a point where it is compromised already, right? You want to be proactive. You want to be sure that you can know when something is going to go wrong and you can avert it before it even happens, right? So what it means is that you are doing all that before it happens. You're just being proactive, right? But again, on the other side, you can also be reactive, right? More or less like the user complains to you. Somebody tells you, "Oh, I can't. I tried, going to this URL, it's not working." Nobody wants the customer to come and tell them that the app is not working. That's like a bad state to be, right? You don't want that. You want to know even before the customer knows, right? So in the real world, that's why you have monitoring in the first place. That's why you need to have monitoring. You have to more or less like it's like creating those like you're putting yourself in a proactive state such that before it happens, I want to be notified and I want to do what is right, right? So that the customer doesn't have to complain, right? So when you think about that, some of the key monitoring principles is basically monitor everything that matters. So if you think this thing is critical to your business, monitor it, right? Meaning you have to set meaningful threshold, right? So what for, like when I say threshold, it just means that what's that threshold that you feel if it's breached, it means something is wrong, right? If it's different for different people, there's no one standard. And then automation, right? That's where automation also comes in because yeah, you can quickly automate the response that has to happen, whether it's notifying somebody or taking an action, right? So just know monitoring, proactive or reactive. Well, we always want to be proactive for the most part. You don't want your customers to be the one to identify a problem with your platform, right? Cool. So when you now talk about AWS, what are the tools there for monitoring? CloudWatch is really at the center of things, right? So anytime you hear CloudWatch, basically cloud watching to watch the cloud. So everything you have in the cloud, if you want to watch it, which in this case is like monitoring it, that's where CloudWatch comes in, right? Um, you can use it to collect traces, you can use it, sorry, to track metrics, logs, and events that are happening within your system, right? And the whole idea is just to provide actionable insight, right, to you, to the business, to understand what's happening, like what to better understand your system, right? So you doing that is also to solve the proactive this slide where we talked about being proactive or being reactive, right? So when you think about the things that CloudWatch offers, there's metrics, and we'll see what metrics is. But the whole idea is that you can actually gather numeric data points. So for example, we've seen how over time you see you're using a computer, right? When you're using a computer, for example, the CPU that you're using or the memory is not one value throughout, right? So what it means is that at different times it is keeping different value, right? So with CloudWatch, you can actually take like that data point of, okay, this is my CPU now, this is my CPU in the next 5 minutes, this is CPU in the next 10 minutes, and you can keep that as a trend, right? And then use that to react. And you can say, oh, if over time, like if in the last 5 minutes I've been using CPU maybe at 60%, that means like something is wrong, or maybe at 90%. Use it's your threshold, you can set that, right? Logging, obviously, to keep your logs. So CloudWatch has logs as part of it. So you can keep logs, logs of your application, logs of your infra, whatever logs you want to keep, all right? There's also alarms. Alarms is basically where we talked about being proactive, right? It happens, you set a threshold, it happens, you are notified, you take action even before it happens, like before it happens. So it's not like it happens, but you set a threshold, you know that if it gets to a point, then it's bad. So before it gets to that point, you set a threshold. And once that threshold is crossed, you are notified, you take action, right? You're being proactive there because you're not waiting for it to happen, right? That's why there's a threshold you are setting. And then there's obviously dashboard. What it means is that you can have a dashboard to visualize all these things. And then we have events, EventBridge to respond to state changes. And we'll see example of that, right? The good thing is that as with all AWS services, they're all tightly integrated, which means one service is pretty much, integrated with another service, and you can relate with them together. Okay. So what is metrics? I was trying to explain it the other time, but this is obviously a slide for it. The whole idea is that you can keep metrics, right? Time ordered data points. That's just what it means. It means that if you look at 30 minutes and you say every 5 minutes, I want to know what is the metric value of this thing. So you can say, for example, and I'm trying to say that the metric is whatever you measure, because in the concept of CloudWatch and metrics, it could be custom metrics also. You can actually send metrics from your application, but the most important thing you need to take note of is that it's time ordered, and it's just a data point, right? So it means you can be sending something. It could be that every time your application downloads a file, you are sending one, meaning, okay, it's downloaded. Maybe the next 1 minute, you can also send points of like how many files were downloaded. The fact that it's timely, it is ordered, and then it's just data points that you're pushing in. It means that over time, you can see a graph. You can say, okay, every 1 minute, what is the average? Like, what's the average, downloads that we make, right? So you know that here, all right, CPU, network, disk, but it can be anything. It's basically a set of data points. You can also, you can use namespace and dimension to organize it in CloudWatch just to make it make sense. And then when you now have those data points, it means that you can take statistics on it. So average is really taking average, right? You sum, you divide. Sometimes you can take the sum, sometimes you can take the mean value, sometimes you can take the max or count. These are all those statistics you can apply on that metrics once you have it, right? So many of the services that we'll see, many of them come with default metrics, right? So it means that if you install RDS, for example, there is like a metric that just comes with it. If you install an EC2 machine, you see a set of metrics, and then you can add more if you wanted, right? There is also by default metrics, they come in 5 minutes, but you can have detailed monitoring if you wanted to be that granular, right? Especially if you wanted to track your application for every 1 minute. In that kind of case, maybe you can go low, right? But the default is really every 5 minutes. And then, like I said, you can send custom metrics from your applications, right? So it's just data points. In as much as you can track it, you can keep it in CloudWatch, and you can report with it or do alarming or whatever you want to do. Okay. Here is just a slide that tells you about the default metrics and then custom metrics. So default metrics are really many of the things that just when you install an EC2 machines, those metrics are there, right? But the custom metrics are really the ones that you send, like from your application, right? For example, EC2 will see if it comes with its own like default metrics, but your application can send custom metric, more or less like every time a file is downloaded, you want to send a count, right? Say this file is downloaded, right? Or whatever, or maybe the bytes that was saved into the database. You can be storing that, at every given time, and then over time you can keep that. And then frequency, basic 5 minutes, but for custom, it can be as frequent as 1 minute. 1 second. You can even go that granular, right? Free for the basic monitoring, but when you do custom metrics, some costs are involved. Okay. Setup, you don't need to set up anything for default metrics, but for custom metrics, there's like need for you to do some extra setup to have it running. And use case one is infrastructure monitoring. The other one is basically your application. It can be any app, right? It can be whether it's Python, Java, whatever application you have, you can monitor it with CloudWatch. And the point here is just so you know that metrics is also not new to AWS, right? CloudWatch is just a service that allows you to do it. But if you talk to people outside the feed of like AWS, they'll tell you they do it with other tools, right? And it's the things I've always said, right? That many of the things you see inside of AWS, it doesn't mean there are not other tools that can do it, right? But if I have to talk about all the other tools, we'll be here for the whole day, right? Because here we are focusing on AWS, but the concept is the same. Even if you go to Datadog, for example, and you wanted to use them to keep metrics and all, the concept is the same. You're really keeping track of like a time-ordered event, right? And then you're sending those data points, and you can report on them, whether it's metric, whether it's whatever you want to do, right? So when you now keep those metrics, right? What do you want to do? If it's just there and doing nothing, it's of no use to you. For the most part, you want to like report on them. Either you want to see like a dashboard that tells you, that gives you a view of how those how the data you're collecting is behaving. Is it trending upward? Is it trending downward? Whatever, right? But again, one other thing you can also do is to alarm, right? To create basically alarms to say if it goes above this threshold, please, I want to be notified because it shows that something is wrong with my system, right? So okay is really when everything is fine. Alarm, obviously there's an alarm. Insufficient data. When you create an alarm for the first time, it's going to take a while for it to get data. So at that point, it can show you insufficient data. But once you have enough data, then you can move to an alarm state, or you can move to like an OK state. Okay. There's so many actions you can perform, and we'll see some examples of that. But you can do things like send to SNS, or do auto scaling, or do EC2 actions, or even systems manager. We talked about system manager not too long ago. We didn't really talk about the in-depth of system manager, but there are many things you can do. You can automate machines. You can do so many things. So you can imagine if an alarm actually can trigger systems manager, right? So you're beginning to see how these things they connect as time goes on. Okay. So So the whole idea is that there are so many metrics from the services on the left, right? AWS services, the metrics, anything that collects metrics, it means that you can create an alarm off them, right? And those alarm would send alerts, right? You can send an alert to SNS, but that's not only what you can do. And remember, yeah, you can actually send alert to SNS, and from even SNS you can do more things, right? But even your alert can directly do, or that your metric, your alarms can actually directly take actions on your behalf, right? So they obviously so you can send email, SNS, or even invoke a lambda function if something happens, do auto scaling events, easy to action. Best practices here, I'm only saying set the proper threshold, right? The point is that threshold is you, right? Because like I said, you understand the data points you are collecting, so it is you that knows which threshold is good to more or less like that gives you the best point of being proactive, right? Because if you're collecting data, there is one, that if it's beyond this for more than 5 minutes, that means something is wrong, right? So that threshold, no one will set it for you. Whether you see on the documentation somebody says 80 or 70 or 50 or 50, for example, or say 50. In the real world, it's your application, your actual usage that determines that. So it means you understand your application and you know what is a good threshold. And when that threshold is crossed, that's when you set the alarm. And that's what you are looking at for, right? What it means is that it means you need to understand your business. You need to understand your business. And sometimes again, these things are from trend. You've seen that on the average, this is where we stay. But if it goes beyond this point, it shows it's always an indication of something is wrong. So sometimes experience also helps in that area. Okay. Um, so we've talked about metrics. Metrics is really collecting them, right? Alarms is really more or less like you're looking at those metrics over time. You're either saying you're looking at the average and say if the average goes above a certain threshold, please let me know. Let me know. But logging is also another kind of CloudWatch service that we can see. CloudWatch capability that we can see. The whole idea, you can push in logs, right? So basically you can keep in logs. And there are many reasons you want to keep logs because if you have so many applications here and there, you want to know what your services are doing, right? There are many places you can send it to, but one destination that is very good is CloudWatch Logs. And the whole idea is that it's there. You can actually do more or less like near real-time monitoring of the log, right? You can go there, you can almost be seeing it near real-time as the logs are coming in, right? You can search them, you can filter them. So what it means is that it's not just one huge log that will take you time. You can actually use filters and queries to actually get data from it, right? Log groups itself is the container that holds the logs. And we'll see a practical example. Log groups is the container that holds the logs. Inside of them, there is like a sequence of log events, and those ones are streams, right? So there is a log group inside, there's like a stream that will come in. And then inside that stream, you now have log events, okay? These details, you will see them, it will become natural to you, but I just put it here in this slide. And so many places you can get logs from them, right? Let's talk about the normal AWS sources. So EC2, you can collect logs from your EC2 machine, right? Lambda functions, you can get logs, right? CloudTrail, Route 53, most of the AWS services will allow you to pipe your logs to CloudWatch, right? And then even your own application can send logs to CloudWatch, right? Because for example, in EKS, if you have so many pods running, one destination, you can push your logs to OpenSearch. You can also push your logs to CloudWatch. It just depends on what you want to do, okay? So when you now think about the logs that we talked about, for example, right? If you wanted to do like metrics and logs collection, right? I think we've seen so many agents at this point. We've seen like the cold build agent. We've seen this. There was one we talked about just not long ago, which is the systems manager, like the agent that you need also there. So there are so many agents you see in AWS, but one of them is also CloudWatch agent, right? As always, it's just an agent that can allow you, pipe that metrics and logs from your machines. So what it means is that you can actually have that agent run on a machine, and for that you can actually send custom logs, right? Custom logs and metrics. Okay. Supports obviously Windows, Linux. The most important thing, just install the agent, right, and then configure it properly, and then you should be able to get your logs going in there. And where it helps is that there are really some custom metrics that you can't see. Like for example, EC2, you will see, for example, there are some metrics you see, but there are some you will not see unless you have like custom metrics being pushed to CloudWatch. That's the only way you will see some of those extra metrics, right? Some you'll see them by default, but some, if you really want to see them, then you have to use custom metrics. Okay. Configuration, there's usually like a minor configuration. Once the agent is running, before, as part of setting up the agent, you need a configuration file, and that will decide which log is going to be sent, which kind of metric is going to be sent to CloudWatch, right? So just know there is a way for you to instrument a machine for you to get to send logs to CloudWatch also. So we've talked a lot about CloudWatch. So now it's like a good time to go into the lab. So let's start from here. So before we go into details, like talking about the especially the logs. Let's talk about the metric. Let's talk about the metrics, for example, and the alarms. Um, so here, what I'm going to do is first of all just go to EC2, right? So I'm just going to go to EC2 here. I'm hoping that I have an EC2 machine that I didn't stop the last time. Let me check. Yes, I do have one, so that's good. The last time I didn't really stop it, so I have one that is running. I'll click on the EC2 instance, right? And then I'm going to go to monitoring, right? Because we're actually talking about monitoring. So most of the things you have in AWS, they are going to like, um, most of them will have like the monitoring tab. The whole idea is that you can have an idea of what is happening. So for example, if you look at this, right, if I go and say view in metrics, but again, you can see it here. So at a glance, like I said, many of the services that you're going to be installing will come with metrics, right? These metrics are all here. So for example, CPU utilization, network in, out bytes. Yeah, so you can have more if you wanted, but I mean, this is given to you. But what's it? They are basically data points that is just telling you, how your machine is behaving, right, over time. So for example, in this case, in CloudWatch, you can see that over time, it is really pushing those metrics, right? So if you see, for example, let me zoom this in a bit, but you see that if you check the data points, you see this is 11, 22:15. The next one will be 22:20, right? Because we said it's every 5 minutes. So it means that it tells you this is the utilization at this point, right? This is the utilization at this point, right? So it gives you a graph. And what it means is that you can use that graph to gauge what is the ideal behavior of your system. And then you can also now set threshold that this is normal behavior, but if it ever goes above this point, then something is wrong, right? So these are metrics. You can also create yours. So I'm not going to be going in depth into like metrics. Just know that ideally, most times you have metrics for most services. You can create yours, but your metrics will always give you like indications of the things you want to do, right? So if we go back, so what I'm now going to do is that let's go back to the EC2 instance that I did create. So the EC2 instance is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open SNS on the other side. So I'm going to do SNS. I'm going to do SNS here. I don't know why the system is slowing down, but I don't know if it's the system or the internet or what now at this point. But so I'm just going to create a new topic, right? So I'm going to call it a standard topic just so we can see what's happening, right? So I'm going to call it monitoring because that's what we're talking about, monitoring topic, right? I think you've seen me use SNS for some time now. I'm just going to keep it default. Like I'm not going to do anything. I didn't spell this correctly. Let me see if I can change it. I really cannot. Let me create a new one. I didn't spell that correctly. So I'm going to do no, standard topic. I'll call it monitoring. All right. So topic. I'm just going to call it this, and then I'm going to do create topic. So we have two topics now, right? So the correct one is this first one. So I'm going to delete this second. So delete me. Delete me. Cool. It's gone. So what I'm going to do is that I have this site 10-minute email. So I'm going to copy whatever I get here, right, as email. And then I'm going to go here. I'm going to create a subscription. So I'm going to go here. I'll create a subscription. In this case, the protocol is going to be email. I'm just going to paste the email that I have from there. And then I'll create a subscription, right? The whole idea is that I want to be notified if something happens because we're talking about monitoring. We want to take proactive steps, right, when things go wrong. So what I will now do is that obviously there is a new email. Let me see if the email is here already. Let's see subscriptions. This one is pending confirmation. Let me see if it has come. Like, did he actually? Did he actually send? Did I copy the right email? Copy. It shouldn't take that long. Okay. Subscriptions, monitoring topic. Let me see if that email address is correct. Okay, I'll create a new one. I'm not sure if so monitoring topic, it's email, and this is the email, and then I'm going to create a subscription, right? And then I'll check here and see if I get an email. Yeah, okay, so this time I got, so there's an email. I'm just going to confirm the subscription. So it's confirmed. So it means that whenever there is like an email, I'll get something. Okay, so we've talked about metrics. So for example, you can see that if you go to EC2 instance, there is really a machine that is running. We've talked about some of the metrics that is sending, right? But what it means is that we can actually go here, for example. So if you go to instances here, there is like a shortcut here. So if you see view alarms, right? Right now there is no alarm. There is no alarm. So I can actually create one. Remember we talked about metrics and then we talked about alarms, right? Metrics are really the data points that are being sent, right? In this case, we are not sending, but we've seen an example of where those metrics are, right? But here we can actually just do create an alarm. So in this case, we're going to create an alarm, search for an alarm, edit an alarm. No, so we're creating a new one, and we're going to search for our topic that we created. The whole idea is that, like I said, what do you call it? An alarm can obviously, it's like you're being proactive, right? You are being proactive. So it means that an alarm is just a way to say, before it gets too bad, let me know, right? So here I would say an alarm, monitoring topic, and then this is where we're now looking at the metrics that is in the system. So if you notice what I said, that most AWS services, they come with their own metrics that you can. So let me actually go to CloudWatch and show you, for example. So in this section, you see on the left, there is metrics, there is logs, there is alarms, right? So let's look at the metrics first. So what it means is that we'll just go in here. So every service you deal with has some sort of metrics that you can work, and you can also push your own custom metrics. In this case, there are so many metrics that is in the system already, right? So we'll just go to metrics. Is my screen not showing fully? I think, okay. Browse. So I'm just going to browse. There are some that are showing, right? So because of the things that I've already done. But if I type EC2, for example, you see metrics that are here. So EC2 per instance metrics. Some of these things, you know them in advanced details as time goes on, because that's where the concept of dimension comes in. But the point is that if you look at the given metrics for instance, for example, it gives you, so whatever you are seeing in that dashboard, they're also here. So for example, like the network in, the network out that we saw, it's here, it's listed, right? So since we know that there is a metric like that, what we're actually trying to do here is to now create a, what do you call it, an alarm of one of those metrics. So in this case, we are going to be saying if the average, right? Like there is, like, this is also the statistics I was talking about: maximum, minimum, count, sum. Many of these metrics, they have statistics that you need to care about, right? In this case, we're looking at the average because we want to say, and you can see many of the things we saw in that dashboard. You can see you can use them here, right? So the one we're going to go for is to look at CPU utilization. So in this case, I'm just going to put 70%, because I'm saying that ideally my CPU utilization on my PC, my computer, should not go above 70%. If it ever goes above 70%, please let me know, because I feel I'm sensing danger, and that's the point of being proactive in this case, right? So I'm saying if it's greater than consecutive period, is just saying that if these metrics, for example, are sent every 5 minutes, right? So if for the first time it was sent, it was 70 or 71, 72, right? And then if consecutive period is 1, that means the first time it sends you, immediately you're going to be notified, right? But you can also say 2 times. Like, I want to see, for the first time you send it to me, the second time you send it to me, that's when I want you to let me know. So if I keep increasing this, for example, it just shows you that for the period and how many times it has to happen within that time for me to be notified, right? In this case, this is the alarm name, but maybe I'm going to change it to CPU monitoring CPU alarm, right? Let me just give it a fancy name, right? So I'm going to do alarm. Okay, so it's here. I'll just leave the description as is, right? The question is that it shows you. So it shows you that this is it shows you. So you're setting an alarm around this level, saying it shouldn't go above 70. If it ever goes above, it's greater than or equal to 70, I want to know, right? So what we'll do at this point is that what's going to be the action, right? Like we've said, an alarm can do many things, right? And that's where you can specify an action. So in this case, we're saying, what should the alarm do, right? In this case, I'm just going to say maybe stop the machine. In some cases, I've seen some cases where something goes wrong, right? And just rebooting the machine fix it. So maybe that's your solution. You can say reboot. But for this class, we're just going to do stop, right? So we're going to do stop. And then remember, there is already a notification topic. So 2 things is going to happen. We're going to be notified. That's one. And secondly, the machine is also going to be stopped. That's just that's what we're saying. We can as well ignore taking an action and just be notified. But in this case, we are saying we want to be notified and we want you to also take an action on our behalf, right? So I'm just going to create that alarm, right? So I'll create it. Remember, what are we doing? We're just trying to be proactive. We have a system already running in cloud, and now we're taking steps to make sure that if anything goes wrong, we are aware, right? So we can go back to cloud metrics again and then see all the alarms that we have. There is really all alarms, right? And there's also a tab for in alarm. In alarm just means this one is having issue, and all alarms is just a list of all the alarms, right? So if you see all, you see this alarm is here, and that's exactly what I said about in the slide. There's really a time when it is insufficient data, meaning it doesn't have enough data to make any decision, right? So if I give it time, it's going to say it's okay, right? Right now we're just operating below the capacity. But if you go to an alarm, nothing is in alarm, right, at the moment. Cool. So let's give it some time for it to come in. We'll refresh. We'll just leave it at that for now. And then while we are doing that, let me just get a command to execute. So I'm going to do this. What's the name again? I think the name of the alarm is this, right? So it's this one. Let's give it time to get enough data so that we'll see what it's going to be. Okay. So I'm just going to copy this. Let's give it some time. Okay, so let me refresh. like I said, it's back to okay, right? The point is that it's not, we know we've seen that machine, it's a very small machine. I'm not doing anything there. So the CPU is never going to be above 70, right? But if you check, for example, if you go into it, you can actually see we set 70 as a threshold, but it's here, it's really down. So whatever is shown blue here is really the current utilization. And what is showing red is the threshold we've set, right? In this case, the machine is not doing anything, so it's fine. So what we're going to do is that I'm going to go to CloudShell. So I'm going to go to CloudShell. I open CloudShell, right? And you know what CloudShell is, right? It's just a way. So whatever, if I go into CloudShell, it's my identity, right? I don't need to start setting user. So it's a quick way. Instead of testing from my local machine, I can just be in here and test the AWS infrastructure that I have, right? So what I'm going to do is to see what's going to happen. Remember, we have 10-minute email. We're here. We've subscribed already. Everything is fine, right? So we've confirmed our subscription. And then we've also subscribed this email to that alarm, right? So what we can do is, now that we're in CloudShell, I have a command here that I'll paste, right? I'm saying that CloudWatch, remember, many of the things you do in the console, many of them you can also do them in the CLI, but you can also do them via code also. Here I'm saying CloudWatch set alarm state for the alarm that we created, right? So the name is monitoring CPU alarm. The state is alarm, right? We've seen the different states. In this case, we are forcing it because I don't have enough activity to put on the machine for it to go into an alarm state. So I'm just triggering it myself here. So I'm saying alarm states, testing on purpose, meaning this is me testing. So I'm just going to execute this command, right? So it's done. It did trigger that alarm. So what we should go back and see is, let's check in alarm, right? And refresh. So there is one in alarm, right? So the alarm was triggered from that command. But this is me triggering it manually. In the real world, something is going to trigger it from usage, from actual usage, right? So what are we expecting? We're expecting to get an email. There is an email here saying that, your alarm. So it gives you all these details saying, the threshold has been breached. There is it tells you everything basically, right? The EC2, it gives you the instance. So if you were somebody that was on call, you could react to this and be like, okay, I think my machine is, something is wrong, right? And then quickly you can go and react, being proactive in this case, right? Again, when we go back to the EC2 instance, what are we going to see? So let's refresh this page and see what happens. You can see it stopping, right? Because why we said when this alarm happens, stop the machine, right? So yeah, we did give it an action to take, right? So we said if this alarm happens, stop the machine. It could be maybe rebooting will solve the problem. Maybe you've known that problem to be something that can be solved by rebooting, right? Cool. So that's really alarm, and every other alarm that you see in AWS or metrics, they behave like that. There's a set of metrics, you're creating an alarm on top of them, and then you can take any action, right? We saw a list of action. What about CloudWatch Logs? What we'll do is that we'll go to Lambda, because that's one of the easiest way for me to show you about CloudWatch Logs, right? But again, let's even go to, so we're in CloudWatch there. We've seen metrics to some extent. We've seen alarms, right? On the left, you're also seeing log groups, right? So if you go, there's log groups, right? So there's some log groups here that were created. So what we can do is go to Lambda. I think we created this function at one point, right? So I think it's just a basic function, but let me even see what the code is saying. Because I don't want to go through the step of creating a fresh Lambda function, right? But let me just see what this one is saying. This one is really saying 1 + 1, right? But I don't know if right now it has CloudWatch capability. So let me see the configuration. Let me see the permissions. Yeah, so whenever you see CloudWatch Logs here, it shows that you can see the log has, it has the ability to create a log group. It has the ability to create a log stream. And it also has the ability to put in a log event, right? And that's the three things I mentioned. There's usually a log group. There's usually a create log stream, right? Permission. Everything in AWS is permission bound. And there is a put log event, meaning after you created a log group, you can create a stream. And inside of that stream, you can push an event, right? So you just need this. So what it means is that I know at this point that my logs are working. So if I go there, I think this Lambda function is using, usually most Lambda functions will have CloudWatch integration, right? So if you see right now, there is nothing, but this is an example of a stream. So the stream is here. So what I'm going to do is just to go into that function, for example. So the one that we're seeing just now, where is it again? Lambda function. Okay, I think I'm actually here. So I'm going to go into the code. And then what I'm going to do is just look at this function. It's a basic function, right? It's 1 + 1. I think if you remember one of our classes, we saw this function. But I'm going to just do print, right? Print is really no big deal. We know what print is, right? Print is just print it to the console, right? So I'm just going to print the value of 1 + 1, right? So that's what I'm going to do. And Lambda, you basically would deploy first, right? So we've added a change, we'll deploy it, and then we'll test, right? In this case, I don't think we're not really taking any events, so we're not taking any variable whatsoever, right? So we can just run a test and see what is shown to the console. So we're going to do test. In this case, I'm actually going to go to the test console, the test page, right? So create a new event, and call it test events, and then I'm just going to do test, right? Good, it succeeded. And one thing you will notice is that there is really a log button here that shows you, go to the logs of this function, right? But even if I see details, it just tells you, okay, this is what happened. The status was fine. But if I actually go to the logs, it's going to lead me to CloudWatch Logs, right? And think about it, this is one function, but again, you want like a place where you're seeing how all your functions are behaving, right? So if you check, when I checked the first time, there was only one log stream. Now there is another stream. And if I click on that log stream, you see that I did hello world and I did 2, right? The hello world 2 is really the result of 1 plus 1, right? Because in the real world, like when you start doing this thing real, you want a place. Like as an infra person, I am really in the place. I'm in the logs. I'm trying to check things. If something is going wrong, it's the logs you are going to go to. Well, what are the sequence of events that happened, right? For us to get here, you could be seeing, okay, where at what point. That's where logging is good. So one thing you should also know that is that logs, there's just one thing I want to mention here. They do have retention period. What it means is that you can choose how long you want to retain them, right? Sometimes some logs you want to keep them just maybe for a day, but some logs are so important you want to keep them for like a year. You choose, right? Obviously logs, they come with a cost. So that's why you need to plan your retention very well, right? But the concept is that it's just a log that you can, that is from Lambda. There could also be some from EKS, some from Fargate, some from whatever your workload is, right? And you can also have like custom, like even non applications that are even just whatever they are, just pretty much pipe it to CloudWatch, right? So the point is that you can have logs, log groups, right? Which is like a container in there. There's like streams, and inside of those streams you have events. Okay. I think yeah. So that shows us. So if you go back to if you go back to CloudWatch, we've talked about alarm. We've seen it come to like we've seen it work. So if you see that first alarm that we're dealing with, it has gone back to OK state. You know, we just triggered it temporarily, right? It has gone to OK state. So it's back to OK now. But the only thing is that I know that our EC2 instance will still stay the same. It's no longer in alarm. So if you see, it's no longer if I refresh, it's not going to be in alarm again, right? But the machine is still stopped because yes, we did not. There is no remediation we did put in place to say if it goes off alarm, resume the machine back, right? But in the real world, you can have any kind of automation you want to have right around machines. It stops. Obviously, we're not seeing an alarm because obviously it's in a stop state, right? But if you go back, the alarm is really showing there's none in alarm, but it doesn't mean the alarm is still there, right? It's just that it's in an OK state. Cool. So let's continue. We'll come back to the console again very soon, but let's continue. So we've talked about this. So let's now talk about EventBridge. EventBridge is very powerful because if you've worked with SaaS before, like software as a service, you understand how much, because software as a service is a concept where sometimes you have like people who do SaaS a lot. You have so many microservices, and a lot of them are talking to themselves, right? And there's usually a point where you want a way for these services that are talking to themselves. You want them to be able to talk to themselves, basically. Like, I did something. I want another service to know that I did the thing, right? It's the same way in AWS, right? The point is that it's really an event bus. EventBridge is an event bus. The idea is that you can actually track events that are happening within your system, right? So something happens, you don't need to be there and be watching it to happen, right? But you can actually listen to that event and be like, I care about this event. And whenever it happens, you can react to it. You can choose what you want to do, right? So it's a serverless event bus service that we have in AWS. Obviously, it's an evolution. Before it was called CloudWatch Events, it's now EventBridge. And the thing is that you can actually get events from all your AWS services that you deploy, right? But you can also send custom events, right? We've seen how we can also send, like from your application, you can send custom metrics. It's the same way you can also send custom events from your application also, right? If you have an event bus, you can actually from your application send events to that event bus. And within your infrastructure, if you have things in place, they can react to that event, okay? And like I said, you can also have like third party, like for example, Zendesk, PagerDuty. You can give them an event bus that they will send stuff to, and based on those events, you can react, right? The key concept is really, you have like events, you can have rules, and rules can say, I want to match this particular event. So when there are so many events, right? But it's not all you care about. But you want to say, when this particular one happens, I want to do this, right? It's different from an alarm in this case, because an alarm is you're setting a threshold. But here, so many events are happening, and sometimes you're interested in few events and be like, when this particular event happens, I want to do this, take this action, right? And then that's where the targets come in, because when the event happens, and you track it, like because you have a rule that matches it, you need to say, what are you going to do next? Like now that you know that this event, has happened, right? And then obviously you can do schema discovery, basically to use more or less like very established event structure, right, within your account. But the diagram there also tries to explain it. There's different event bus. The main concept is really there's an event bus. You can have rules in place, and those rules can catch those events, and then you can trigger targets, right? And those targets can be anything, right? Anything you want to do. Okay, and we'll see example. Here you can have so many event patterns. We'll see an example. You can I'm just more or less like telling you that you can have many event kind of patterns, right? You can have rules, You can also have like you can do like pipes, obviously advanced concept, but at some point we'll talk about pipes, right? But just not even talking about let's not even doing pipes at the early stage, you still can get the value of EventBridge, right? But pipes actually makes it's like you're creating like a whole pipeline for your event architecture, right? But what it means is that you can also have, for example, you can match. So if there is like an event that has been sent every time EC2 something is happening, right? Because EC2 will start, it will stop, it will be terminated. EventBridge can be taking note of all those events and it can be wiring it somewhere. And then if you're interested in it, you can capture it and then use it to do something, whatever you want to do, right? There's common targets like Lambda, SQS, SNS, step functions, code pipeline, all the beautiful things that we've seen. Okay. So let's go back to EventBridge. So what we'll do here is that we'll go back to 10-minute email. I don't know if this email has expired. I think we still have time. So it's like 4 minutes. I'm hoping that we can go through the EventBridge part before this one expires, right? So what we're going to do is that we'll type EventBridge. That's like I said, this is one of the fastest way you can get to any service in AWS. Just type it in the search console. So we'll go to EventBridge, right? So what I'm going to do first of all is to start this machine again. So I'm going to do instance state. I'm going to start it. Remember, it was stopped, right? It was stopped by an alarm, but now I'm going to stop it, right? Sorry, it was stopped. Now I'm going to start it again. So it's running now. So what I'm going to do is that I did click event boss. I don't know if it took me there, like EventBridge, right? Cool. There's a lot that can happen here, but I'm just going to show you some of the, I'm going to show you some of the just the cool stuff, the early cool stuff that you can start doing. So I'm going to do create a rule, right? Create a rule. So I'm just going to say which rule am I going to create now because of what I want to know. So I'm just going to create it and say let me know, right? Because I really want to know when something happens, right? So in this case, I'll say I want to know, whatever. Now, like I said, there is like you can have you can use the default AWS boss, which is really where all the events within AWS is going to, right? But you can have your own boss. You can create your own event boss, and you can also use third party, like you can connect to third party event boss, right? So the thing is that here you can do like I've chosen the default event boss. In this case, I'm not doing a schedule because you can actually have like, so let me, while we're on this, while we're here, you can actually go to, now it did take us to a new UI completely, but what it means is that you can actually create a schedule, right? For your events, for your event pattern, right? By then it becomes like a cron job, right? But we're not going to talk about that for now. Just so you know, it's supported. So I'm just going to go back to the UI that I was, and I'm going to create I'm just going to create a rule. Okay, so I'll call it let me know. It's what I was doing before, so I want to know. So I'm going to do next, right? So rule with an event pattern is the approach we're going. Here I'm going to say AWS events. There could be others, right? And there could be all events, right? In this case, I'm interested in AWS events. Use pattern from. If I want to use pattern from a particular AWS service, so I'm going to come here and choose EC2. You see, there's so many services there, right? That you can listen to event from, right? I'm going to go here. So EC2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for EC2, and then see all the events that are there. So there's this EC2 instant state notification, right? There are so many events, so it's the one that you're interested in that matters. But in this case, you can see there's EC2 instant state change notification, and you can go here and click. The question is that you want to be notified. You can also see the events that is being that the pattern, because in code we will use the pattern, right? But in the UI you can just follow the UI. But actually in code you can create the pattern here, and if you were doing infra as code, for example, using Terraform or CloudFormation, it is really the pattern you'll be using, right? But what it means is that you can do any state, right? But in this case I'm specific. I want a particular state, and I want to say when my machine is stopped, right? Is the state I'm interested in. It could be any instance, but in this case, I want to be specific. So I want to go to a particular instance that I have, which is this one. So I'm going to copy the instance ID, right? I'll go back and I'll paste it here. So I've pasted, and then I'll do next. So this is where it's saying, what is the target? Like when this machine is stopped, I will notify you. But what do you want to do after that? And this is where I'm going to say, I want you to notify me. If you can also see, there are many things you can do. Code pipeline, you can trigger a pipeline. You can, do glue workflow, Lambda function, right? In this case, I'm going to keep it simple. So I'll say SNS topic. And then the target is going to be in this account, obviously my monitoring topic, right? Execution code role, as most times a service, when it's talking to another service, they need like a role. So in this case, it's going to create one for me, right? But if you have an existing role, you can obviously use additional settings. I'm going to keep it as is, and then I'm going to create it next. So it gives me a summary. I'm going to create a role. So let's just check and make sure that 10-minute mail is still working. So where is that one? I think it's here. So we still have like 3 minutes, right, to do all this. So what we are going to do is to go back to Cloud Shell, right, and do everything we did. Remember what we did before is that we did pushed an alarm. The alarm stopped the machine. So it was triggered, and then it stopped the machine. But now we've even gone extra. This is me putting out a case. There can be 1,000 cases you can draw from this, right? But the whole idea is that the machine is stopped. And now we're also saying when it stops, because I know there is a breach, there is like a there's like a bus that event is piped to when the machine stopped, right? And I'm also now listening to that event, and I also said, I want to be notified. Maybe I also want to be like, if you ever stop my machine on my behind my back, maybe trigger a Lambda function that starts the machine back. But in this case, to keep it simple, I'm just saying notify me, right? So we're going to go back and run this command, and we're going to see all the things we've seen, and then in addition there'll be more things, right? So we've triggered the alarm again, like we did before, and now if we go back to CloudWatch, obviously there will be, let's see, it's an alarm. We know that, right? An alarm is gonna trigger. There is also like a new email. So if you scroll down, there is a new one that says this is an alarm, right? This one says it's an alarm. So we've gotten that one. So what do you think is going to happen next? So we've got the machine is stopping. So the machine is actually stopping. I think we did miss it when it started, but you notice that it's stopping. So let's give it time. It's still in stopping. Remember, you can also track the stopping event, but in this case, we didn't track that. So it's stopping. So let's give it some time. So it's stopping. It's taking some time to stop, but at least we've gotten the email. So it's more or less like we're still back to where we were. So we've gotten the monitoring alarm, right? But we've not gotten any other email, right? Because maybe the machine has not stopped. So we're going to leave it while let's give it some time. But the only difference is that for event bus, there's really no log, right? There's no log, but it's serverless. We know AWS is keeping track of that event. And if you say you're interested in the event, you're going to get it. However you want to listen to it, whether you want to trigger a Lambda function or trigger a code, all that is going to happen if you instrument it correctly, right? So in this case, it's still stopping. Let me refresh it and see. Yeah, I don't know why it's taking so long to stop, but let's give it time. It's still stopping. So let's go to here. I've not seen any email, so that tells me it has not stopped, because ideally, if it has stopped, I want to get another email, right? But you can see, even while we're talking, the email has come, right? Because now I got another email. This email is different from the other one. The other one was like monitoring CPU alarm. That was the one that was triggered. We said, I want to know. And we said when that alarm happens, stop the machine, and it did stop the machine. But again, we also had another trigger somewhere that said, all these systems that you're giving to me, please, I want to know this particular. Whenever it stops, let me know. And in this case, we just said notify me, and you can see here it has shown you. So this email is different from the one above. In this case, it's saying it's giving you all the details. I think this one, let's ignore this one because it's saying if you want to unsubscribe. We don't really care about it, but you can actually see it, right? And the notification is saying this particular instance is the state is stopped, right? That's the most important thing for us. You can see that the state here is stopped. It gives you the particular instance. Maybe that's what you want. In this case, we faked it, but it could also be stopping that machine is a bad decision. And maybe this is supposed to trigger a Lambda function, and that Lambda function is supposed to bring back the machine, and start it again, right? Maybe someone stopped it unknowingly, right? So that's one good use of EventBridge. And you can also have like cron that we didn't go through, but you can have like a schedule that runs at a given time, or like every 10 a.m. On Mondays, right? You can have schedules like that for you to execute your rules. Okay. Let's go back to the slide. Like I said, I'm trying to be fast so that we can actually go through this entire document. So we've seen that. So we've seen the event bus itself. We've seen I've created rules, and from that rule, we've been able to trigger a target. In this case, a target in our own case that we use is SNS, but there could be more targets, right? Depending on your use case. That brings us to X-Ray. X-Ray is not something we can go in depth at right now, but just know that it's a service for distributed tracing, right? Tracing also is not new to AWS, so it's just that AWS X-Ray is a service in AWS that allows you to do distributed tracing. The whole idea is that you can instrument your applications, right? And in such a way that they can actually keep traces. Traces are just a way to tell you that everywhere they are going to, they're telling you what is happening in that flow, right? How long it is taking, or if there was an error, right? You're just keeping track of all that. So whenever you see there is a need for you to do that within your application, there is a service you can use in AWS that is called X-Ray, right? Distributed tracing. You can use it to debug your application. You can see your architecture and the request flows, right? So it's like just like in this image, you can see from the client, it went to this service, from this service, it went here, and all the things that it did in between, right? And again, this topic is all about monitoring, right? So the whole idea is that you can find bottlenecks. You can see if a place is taking like 5 seconds, right? And you're wondering why a request is taking so long. It's easy for you to go to the application to see where exactly did that thing happen, right? And then you can obviously understand also the dependencies between the services to see how they connect with themselves, right? Tracing is more advanced to some extent because you need to instrument your service, right? So there's some application coding that you need to do on the app side for you to instrument it. But X-Ray is a service, just so you know at this level that if you really wanted to do distributed tracing, there is a service called X-Ray that you can do it with. And that brings us to CloudTrail. I think I showed you CloudTrail at some point, but CloudTrail, there is not much that is advanced about CloudTrail. It's just for you to know that all the things you do inside of AWS is recorded, right? It's recorded, and we'll go and see the CloudTrail and have an idea of all the things we've been doing, what has been recorded, what was kept, right? So it records all our AWS API calls. Take note, AWS API calls, meaning the calls you are making within AWS. So sometimes when I create if I terminate a machine, I stop a machine, all those are actions I'm taking. And it's being trailed, it's being kept somewhere, right? And you know why that is important. Audits, compliance, if you wanted to see who is doing what within your account, it's easy for you to know this is the guy that shut down the machine or this is the guy that started the machine, right? Um, Obviously, there's a default behavior that's to keep 90-day like your 90-day event history, but you can obviously do more. What's recorded, who did, right? And when did it happen? And who, like what was the API that was called, right? And then where, if the IP is available, that can also be used, right? So and then the use case is obviously if you want to do analysis around who is doing what in your account, or you want to do compliance, and or you can also do troubleshooting. I think we've seen where we've used CloudTrail to troubleshoot. There was a time I was trying to create something, it wasn't working. I checked CloudTrail and I saw that it was failing because of a particular, how the policy was written, right? So it means in CloudTrail there was an event that said I was trying to create a policy, and when I went there, it was complaining, right? So Trail is, you can also use it for troubleshooting actually. In CloudTrail, there's like management events, so events like control plane. So in the AWS world, you'll soon be understanding like what's control plane, what's data plane. So control plane are really more or less like management events, right? So it's not really talking about like the low level events when you're dealing with the service itself, right? So for example, like it's not really talking about like your data plane, like your data events, and data events are really data plane operations. So for example, if you want to do like put to S3, it's different from if you were creating an S3 bucket, right? So creating an S3 bucket is like a management event, but like putting file into like an S3 bucket is like a data event, right? So storage, obviously there's storage, you can do multi-region trails, and at some point you also be seeing AWS organization, right? Which is more or less like a way you can do centralized log trade, like centralized logging for all your accounts, right? So when you now compare CloudTrail versus CloudWatch, what are they? CloudTrail is really mostly for compliance, right? So while CloudWatch is for performance monitoring, you will not be doing performance monitoring with CloudTrail, right? But you'll be doing audits and compliance. And then API calls and changes, who is doing that? But we've seen CloudWatch is really around logs, metrics, events, right? Who did what is what CloudTrail is interested in, but how is something performing is what CloudWatch is interested in, right? And yeah, the other ones are just there's some delay. There's a lot of delay for CloudTrail, but obviously because CloudWatch is for monitoring, the delay is almost near real time, right? And you saw how it was easy for us to demo because it's really CloudWatch. It's for monitoring. You don't want to be notified 5 minutes after something has happened, right? So what does CloudTrail look like in the account? It's not a big deal. So if you go to CloudTrail, um, you'll be. I know for many of you who have followed me till this point, you know that we've talked about so many services, right? And they all have their uses. All have all these services that I'm talking to you. I use them because they do have their use, right? So for example, if you go to event history, right? So you see, this is me, Brainyl. I'm here. It tells me the things that I did. I did put credential at some point. I did put target. If you remember the time I was putting a rule, right? So if you were wondering, oh, something happened, who did it, right? Yeah, you can go back and check. So at least if you see there was like a put rule event and it says exactly who did it, this is the ARN of the user identity, the ID, the access key ID that I use, and all that. If I scroll down, obviously, give me more information, but they also didn't say it said there's no error code. You can see many events, right? So it tells you who. And in some cases, I was the one doing it, but in some cases, obviously, I wasn't also the one, right? So in this case, for example, there was a create log stream that a 1+1 lambda function did, right? But again, that's an identity because the lambda function was assuming a role to do it, right? And then in this case, it is creating a log stream. So anything you're looking for, all the activities that are happening within your account, there is like CloudTrail for you to see that, right? To see them in one place. So let's go back to the slide. So we've talked about CloudTrail versus CloudWatch. One is really performant, and one is audit, right? When you want to, and that brings us to, we're still talking about monitoring. Where will you see what, like in the account, especially in the concept of monitoring or in the concept of auditing, right? And that brings us to like the health dashboard, right? Sometimes you want to know what is the health, what is the health. It could be, remember, sometimes it's about you, but sometimes what about the data center that you're hosted? If something goes wrong, that's beyond you, right? But you want to be aware, right? So there's two types. There's the service health, and there is also like the account health, right? It used to be personal health, but now it's account health, right? Where you could see like your resources. So what it means is that the service health itself talks about the health of AWS in general, while the personal health talks about the things that you are using, how, if they're healthy or not, if something is correct, and like if there's like a disruption in that service, you will know. But in general, there's also a place where you can see, what's happening, and we'll see it in the dashboard, right? Like with all AWS services, there's so many integrations that you can have like alongside, like so you can do like automated response to any of those kind of events, right? Some you see there's different categories: maintenance, maybe service issues, maybe it's not account notice or security, right? I think this one is more useful if we see it in the account. So if I actually go here, for example, you can see in your notification, because it's like a notification, right? You can, if you click here, you can go, you can see like what are the events that are happening. In this case, there's no event. But if you actually go to see all health events, sometimes it does this, takes me out, but I'll go back to the account. So if I do all health events, you can see service health, right? So if you do service health, let's start from there, and you do service history, it really tells you basically what's happening like around AWS. Like, so service history, everything is fine. API gateway is fine. App flow is fine. It gives you all these details, so you can see all the services, right? But in your own account, there's also your account health, right? And that's where you can actually now go and see what are the issues happening within your account. I'm not entirely sure why it does this, but right. So this is my account. Nothing is happening. So there's nothing happening. There's no schedule change that's going to happen in my account. There's no other notification that I need to see. There is no, yeah. Obviously, there's some event logs. Yeah. Basically, there were some events probably that I didn't see. Maybe I wasn't even around then, or I wasn't reacting to the events, right? But at some point, it did tell me that there was like operational issue for IAM, right, or operational issue for EC2, right? So it tells you when it was opened, what the issue was. It gives you like a timeline of when it was resolved, right? So these things you could keep track of them too, and more or less like create, send notification to your Slack channel to be notified when these things happen, just to know if it's impacted. Maybe that's actually what is impacting you. If, for example, your EC2 machine starts misbehaving, right? If you get notification from this kind of place that says, oh, your account EC2 as a service is having issues, then you know that okay, it's not peculiar to you. There is something that's been announced concerning it, right? Cool. Let's continue. So that's everything about. I think this is just going into details, more or less like talking about what's the service health, what is the personal health itself. But we've seen it in the UI. That basically, and then that brings us to trusted advisor, right? So in your account, we've been talking about best practice since we started this class. We've been talking about best practice, do the right things and all that. But sometimes also in your account, you have the opportunity to use a service in AWS that actually tells you when you are not following best practice, and there are some pillars there. For example, so it's just like AWS in this case is helping you do consultancy and telling you, I think this, because as time goes on, we'll see what is the well architected framework, right? But it's centered around understanding if some things can be cheaper for you, if whether it's around performance or security, fault tolerance, or even your service limits, right? But the point is that it's a place where you can actually see some best practices that you can follow in AWS. So it's like you're relying on an advisor to tell you, but it's not a free service. Some things come free, some things, and that's why a lot of people don't turn it on in their account, right? Because it involves using it involves some cost, right? So like for free, there is basically some checks, but again, if you want to go to business or enterprise level, then there is like some cost associated, right? But again, it's good because it's just one place that if you enable it, especially if your organization is very large, you now have so many services you are dealing with. Sometimes it's just good to have like one place where you can go and see, okay, what are the things I can tweak? What are the things I can tweak that can immediately, improve my security posture or save my cost, right? And it's good because if as a DevOps engineer or cloud engineer, you need those because you can be going there. Sometimes those are the things that helps you. You can also use them to create tickets, just to have an idea of the things to work on. Sometimes because you're everywhere, and sometimes dashboards like this can help you, pinpoint some of the areas where you didn't do the right thing and that you should follow, right? So if you go in here and you type trusted advisor, trusted advisor, right? Remember, I was talking about monitoring, right? We're looking at the things basically that you need to keep an eye on that can help you, operate properly in AWS. So we've looked at CloudWatch, we've looked at CloudTrail, and now we're looking at trusted advisor. We've also looked at the health dashboard, right? Just in case we also want to keep an eye on those kind of events and be notified. But here, because obviously mine is free, I'm not using anything. Some are graded, but you can see, for example, it tells me if you have an EBS volume that is over provisioned, right? So it means you as an engineer, you can sometimes provision EC2 machine, give it a large EBS volume that you forgot, right? But here it can actually tell you, oh, we've seen this EBS volume over time. I think it's over provisioned. Maybe you can do something about it, right? So it tells you many things under the cost. What about performance? There are so many things you can see around performance. So this is cost. What about performance? You can see, for example, let me see one that looks good. Yeah, you can see, for example, EC2 auto-scaling group is not associated with the launch template. We've done EC2 auto-scaling group, and we did put the launch template to it. But if you didn't have, it can notify you. There's also like Amazon ABS provision, IOPS volume attachment configuration. It can give you basic things around. What about security? And there's some checks also that comes around security. You see, for some it's free, especially if I have like EBS public snapshot or I have like RDS public snapshots. But here you can also see, for example, S3. It gives you like if your X3 bucket permission is open, right? So these are recommendations. Sometimes we do these things as best practice, but sometimes also it's possible you didn't follow best practice. But instead of because when you have so many services, you have like hundreds of S3 bucket, hundreds of EC2 machine, like hundreds of that's the real world. Hundreds of easy automation, like sometimes it's hard to follow. But if you come to like a place like this, you can drill down to see, okay, I think I need to take these actions. Okay, so it's just like your trusted advisor inside of AWS. Can also go to fault tolerance. You know what fault tolerance is, right? That's when you're talking about multi-easy and the things around that area. What about service limits? Things like like check for usage that is more than 80% of cloud formation stacks limit, right? So, service limit is basically checking your limits, checking the things that you're doing that probably would exceed that limit. And then we also have one for operational excellence, right? So Amazon VPC without flow logs. We've seen what a flow log is. A VPC flow log is basically what is keeping track of all the logs that are going through the VPC. So if you don't have a log that is keeping track of that, it means that all the people who are accessing your VPC, you don't have like a lens on them. And it shows that operationally you're not excellent, right? So that's why you have this. So trusted advisor is just that service. Nobody's going to, and you basically need to know the pillars on the left and then know the service itself. But for implementation details, nobody is expecting you to know all these ones, right? But if you have them enabled, it's a service you can always benefit from, right? Knowing that it's there and it can help you do more. Okay, so that's trusted advisor in a nutshell. Yeah, there's some checks here. We've seen them in the UI, right? Around cost optimization, around performance, around security, around fault tolerance, around service limits, right? So that brings us to best practice. Looking at all the things we've talked about, monitoring is key. Like monitoring is actually at the heart of everything DevOps or cloud, or because you're in the cloud, you've already gotten that, assurance. The cloud is there, is doing these things for me. But again, I mean, you have to put things in place just to make sure things won't fall apart, right, while you're sleeping. So monitor at all layers. Use metrics, logs, be proactive. That's what I said at the beginning. Don't be reactive. Don't let your customers be the ones to tell you something is wrong with your system. Rather, be notified on time, right? You saw how we're doing. There was like SNS integration. You can pipe that into Slack and be notified immediately and be like, oh, this thing is going to something bad is happening, and then you can stop it before it even happens, right? You can start simple, right? Start simple, use the default metrics. But again, if you want to go, even app level, then you can begin to push custom metrics to CloudWatch and report on them if you want to. Obviously, there's need for dashboarding. You have to create dashboard for these metrics, right? And this in a centralized place where everyone can see, not just you, but the organization, maybe the developers, maybe the senior member. It's just like one place everyone can know exactly what's happening, right? If they want, and then automation, right? You saw how we are triggering SMS, but we could do other things. You can trigger a Lambda function that remediates something. You can trigger a pipeline to go and do something, like whatever you want to do, but automation has to be part of it if you really want to make the best use of the best practices around monitoring, right? Common mistakes, alert fatigue. This is practical because we see it all the time. If you have so many things you are reporting on, sometimes it's now too much, and then you begin to miss out on critical metrics or critical events. So sometimes don't alert on so many events. I know it's easy for you to just be like, oh, you're just alert. No, but sometimes pay attention to only the metrics that you care about, the core metrics of your business, not all metrics that you need to report on, right? And then untested alarm, sometimes it's actually not working, but you just rolled it out, and then you miss a critical event because you didn't, there was not something there. So what about the summary? CloudWatch, we've seen it. It's a service. We have logs as part of it, events. You can do metrics as part of it. You can do alarms as part of it. And we did try to just put a small example to show how it works, but there are more complex stuff we can do in there also. X-Ray, obviously, distributed tracing. It needs some. It's not magic. You have to instrument the application. So there's some code development that's required on that end, right? And CloudTrail is there for auditing, compliance. You want to know who is doing what in your account, right? Because in the real world, everyone will have different permission, and sometimes you really want to know who was able to do this particular action, right? So CloudTrail will do that. Trusted advisor is that other person inside of AWS that is acting also like a consultant and can help you, follow best practice and do what is right. Proactive monitoring, obviously, is key to really standing out in the cloud field, right? So, and then we've seen that there's so many integrations, right? These services always integrate to themselves, right? And that's the beauty. And that's why I'm teaching you AWS native, right? You can use other tools, but inside of AWS, there's really this ecosystem of services that you can use to get build anything you want to build, whether it's AI, compute, databases, whatever you want to do, right? Please don't forget set comprehensive monitoring before you need it. The point is that it's something when you set up a service. Ideally, the next thing is you're setting up a monitoring to go with it, right? Because you don't want to. That's just the whole idea of being proactive. You've set it up, and then you're setting up metrics already that is giving you idea of, okay, this is how we are using this service, and you can begin to see the trends, right, and observe it, and then notify yourself or create alarms if anything is happening that you're not anticipating, right? So that brings us to the end of this class.